Think about this for a second. A set of rules, federal rules, so huge it dwarfs massive libraries. And hidden inside, like traps, are rules you could break without even knowing and face serious consequences.
Yeah, that's pretty much the reality of federal regulations we're talking about.
It's this massive maze, right? Over 175,000 pages. And somewhere in there, well, nobody even knows exactly how many potential criminal offenses there are. It's kind of mind-boggling.
Hundreds of thousands, some estimates suggest. It's a vast, unknown number.
So our deep dive today is really getting into this whole issue of overcriminalization and specifically a policy shift, trying to bring some, I guess, clarity, maybe fairness?
Fairness is a big part of it, yes. And transparency.
We want to unpack what this means for you, the listener, the average person navigating this.
Well, the first thing that jumps out is just how impenetrable the whole system feels. Like you said, 175,000 plus pages in the Code of Federal Regulations. I mean, who can actually read all that, let alone understand it?
Exactly. No one person.
And the result is this hidden layer of things that can land you in criminal trouble. It creates this constant risk, really, of accidental violations. Ordinary stuff you do could, technically, be criminal.
It really paints a picture of a legal minefield, doesn't it? You take a wrong step without knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to a really key legal idea here. Mens rea.
Ah, yes, mens rea.
Can you break that down?
Yeah.
At its core, it's about the guilty mind, right?
Exactly. It's the mental state. Did you intend to do wrong? Did you act knowingly, willfully? That's traditionally central to criminal law.
Okay.
But the big issue with a lot of these federal regulations is something called strict liability.
Strict liability.
Yeah?
Sounds serious.
It is, because it means you can be convicted just based on the act itself. It doesn't matter if you intended to break the rule or even knew the rule existed.
Wow. So zero intent needed.
Potentially, yes. And when you combine that strict liability with this enormous, unknowable body of rules, well, some have called the potential outcomes absurd and unjust.
I can see why. Facing criminal charges for something you didn't even know was wrong.
It feels fundamentally unfair to many.
And it makes you think about resources, too. Who can actually navigate this?
Well, that's a crucial point. Large corporations, they have teams of lawyers.
Right, compliance departments.
Exactly. They can spend time and money figuring this stuff out, trying to stay on the right side of the line. But the average American, a small business owner, they don't have that luxury.
So they're just out there trying their best in this unknowable landscape, as you called it.
Making them much more vulnerable to stumbling into one of these strict liability traps. It's a very uneven playing field.
Okay, so there's a clear problem, this imbalance, this risk. What's the policy response we mentioned? What's it trying to do?
So the core idea is to try and ease that burden, reduce the risk of people becoming criminals without knowing it. It's really about increasing transparency and accountability and pushing back towards requiring that guilty mind, that mens rea.
How does it do that? What are the mechanics?
Well, a big piece is public reporting. Agencies now need to actually list out all their regulations that carry criminal penalties. Publicly, on a list.
Finally, so you could actually look them up?
Theoretically, yes. The list should include the potential penalties and, importantly, the mens rea standard required for each offense.
That tackles the unknown number problem head on.
It does. And there's a strong push. They're strongly discouraged from criminally enforcing anything not on that public list.
That sounds like accountability. If it's not listed, maybe you shouldn't be prosecuting it.
That seems to be the spirit, yes. Putting the onus on the agency, to be clear.
What about new rules going forward?
The policy says future rules with criminal consequences should be flagged very clearly right up front in the Federal Register, like, warning, breaking this rule could lead to criminal charges, and citing the law that allows it.
So no more burying it in the fine print.
Hopefully not. And even more significantly, the actual text of the rule should spell out the specific mens rea requirement for each part of the offense, not just generally, but element by element.
So getting rid of ambiguity. Making it clear what level of intent is needed.
Precisely. Trying to avoid that sort of implied strict liability where it's just assumed if the rule doesn't say otherwise.
And what about creating new strict liability crimes?
Yeah.
Is the policy trying to limit those?
Yes, definitely. It explicitly calls strict liability criminal offenses generally disfavored.
Disfavored, okay.
And to back that up, any new proposed rule creating a strict liability crime is now treated as a significant regulatory action.
Which means more hurdles?
Much more scrutiny. It triggers a review by OIA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. Basically, it makes it harder for agencies to create these types of offenses.
So listing existing ones, being clearer in new ones, and making it tougher to create strict liability rules.
Hmm.
It sounds like a real shift in emphasis
It points towards shifting enforcement focus, too.
away from the accidental stuff.
That's the idea. The policy states criminal enforcement should generally be disfavored. It suggests prosecution is most appropriate for people who knowingly and willingly break rules, especially if it causes real public harm.
Focusing on intent again.
Yes. And specifically looking for evidence that the person knew their conduct was unlawful.
What if it is a strict liability situation, though, where intent isn't legally required?
Well, even there, the policy encourages agencies to think twice about criminal charges. It suggests using civil penalties or administrative actions instead, a less severe route.
So, acknowledging a violation might have happened, but maybe not rising to the level of a criminal conviction if there was no intent.
Exactly. A more proportionate response, perhaps.
And how do agencies actually decide whether to, refer a case for criminal prosecution? Does the policy touch on that?
It does. Again, transparency is key. Agencies are told to publish their guidelines for making criminal referrals.
So we can see what factors they consider.
Yes, and crucially, those factors must include things like the person's awareness of the law, their knowledge or lack of knowledge about the specific rule.
Interesting. So the person's state of mind should be part of that internal decision-making process.
That's the directive. And it goes a step further. It asks agencies to look into setting up a kind of default mens rea standard.
A default, what does that mean?
Like a background assumption that some level of intent is required unless a specific rule explicitly says otherwise.
That could potentially cut down on strict liability quite a bit if implemented.
It could be quite significant, yes.
Okay, this all sounds pretty comprehensive. A lot of changes aimed at fairness and clarity. But are there catches, limitations, things this policy can't do?
Oh, absolutely. And it's important to understand those. First off, this is an executive policy. It can't change the actual laws passed by Congress.
Right, it operates within the existing statutes.
Exactly. It has to be consistent with current law. Also, the policy itself doesn't give citizens new rights to sue the government in court.
Meaning, if an agency doesn't follow this policy perfectly, you can't necessarily take them to court just based on that.
Correct. It's more about internal direction and public pressure. And notice the word should, used a lot for future rules.
Should versus must. So it's strong guidance, but maybe not an absolute ironclad mandate in every case.
That's a fair reading. It suggests the intended direction, but might allow for some agency discretion.
And are there any areas completely left out?
Yes, and this is a big one. The policy explicitly states it does not apply to enforcing immigration laws
Okay.
or regulations related to national security or defense.
Wow. So immigration, national security, defense, these major areas are exempt.
They are excluded from this particular policy push.
Which means the problems we've been discussing, undisclosed rules, strict liability offenses,
Yeah.
could still be very much present in those areas.
That's the implication, yes. These reforms don't reach into those specific domains.
That's a significant caveat to keep in mind. So let's try to pull this together. We've seen the sheer scale of federal regulations, the hidden criminal risks, the unfairness of strict liability.
The unknowable landscape, yeah.
And we've looked at this policy effort aimed squarely at that, pushing for transparency, bringing mens rea back into focus, discouraging strict liability,
Trying to make the system more understandable, more linked to actual fault.
while also seeing the limits. It can't change laws, enforcement isn't guaranteed, and major areas like immigration and national security are carved out.
It's definitely an attempt to rebalance things, recognizing how punitive the system can feel, especially for those without, armies of lawyers.
So for you listening, trying to make sense of government actions, maybe think about this. How does more transparency about these rules actually change your awareness, your sense of obligation?
Right. And what does focusing more on mens rea, on intent, really mean for how enforcement might play out in practice? Does it feel fairer?
And considering those limitations we discussed, especially the carve-outs, what else might be needed? Does Congress need to step in with broader legislative reforms?
Or perhaps how do we balance the need for transparency and accountability with the government's perceived needs in sensitive areas like national security? Where does that balance lie?
Lots to reflect on there. This has been a deep dive into the complex world of federal regulations and the ongoing efforts to make them clearer and perhaps fairer. It's a critical piece of how our government works, often quietly, but with real impact.
Definitely encourage you to stay aware of these kinds of shifts. Understanding the rules of the game matters.